Okay, so Yoram and Aleph are on the third line. So we're talking about Rebbe's shita in regard to someone who's not her husband can make her considered a ba'ula if he's bal her shlo kedarko. However, still, if someone else would rebal her, he would still have to pay knas. So it only makes her ba'ula to stop the din of nara marasa. But he's still committing adultery with her, so he'd get chenek. But because she's literally still a basula, she has a basulim, so for knas, he has to pay the knas of 50 shekel for raping her. Rabbanan hai levado ma'avdi bitlei. So the Rabbanan who hold that all of those 10 people who are ma'anis her shalokadarko get misa of skila for nara marasa. What do they learn from levado? Because Rebbe darshans that the man who laid with her levado only gets skila. So what do they learn from levado? They need it for the following brisa. So both of them die until they both are equal. So Rashi says equal meaning they're both adults, above bar mitzvah or bas mitzvah age. So a katana would be ptura, but a nara, so a gadol being boil on a nara, but a gadol on a katana wouldn't get skila. Divrei Rabbi Oshia. Rabbi Yonasan Omer, Umeso Isha Sheshachavi Molavada. But Rabbi Yonasan says that he himself can die, even if she can't. So even if she is below the age of onshin, so she's not an hour yet, he can get exeris kasa. He can get skila. Rabbi Yochanan Hai Svara Minale. So Rabbi Yochanan, how do we know that both ages, that both the boel and the nivala have to be gedolim? Hai Svara Minale. Im kenichtav krabulas ish. My bulas bal shmamina tarti. If he held that he had to be just ba'ula, I would say ba'ulas ish. Why ba'ulas bal? So we see that it also has to be bar onshin. Two dots. Chilas biakona, usof biakona. Does the beginning of the act of biakona or the end? Nafkamina kagon sharaba upashti yadav kibel Kiddushin mi'acher. Nafkamina would be if he started the bia and then someone else gave her a star or money and she stuck out her hand and accepted it from someone else. If the chilas bias kona, that she's already married to the first person and she can't be married to the second person. And we already mentioned on Daf Beis machlokas between the Pnei Yoshua and Daf what Mem Gimel and Gittin, and the Avnei Miluim. If the reason that a nesua or a mekudeshes can't accept Kiddushin is because she doesn't have a yad l'kabel Kiddushin, or because she's an Eishes, so she's an erva, and Kiddushin are toasted with arayos. Or another nafkamir would be a kohen gadol if he's allowed to marry a basula with bia, because a kohen gadol is only allowed to marry a basula. If tchilas bia kona, he could marry a woman with bia. If sof bia kona, so by the time that he did ha'ara, she's no longer basula. So by the time that he's kona her at the end, she's not a basula anymore, and he's not allowed to marry her. So that's another nafkamina. So what's the halacha? Amar Ameimer Mishmei de Rava kol habo al daito gemar bia. Rava answered, whoever finishes his das is on the gemar bia. So you see that sof bia kona. So Tosfos asks some questions in regard to arayos. Says tchilas bia kona, that as soon as you did hara, you'd be chayiv misa for adultery or for incest, whatever the halacha is. So he has several answers, but the very important thing to know is the last answer in Tosfos, and this is a fundamental thing to know in Kiddushin. I mentioned it I think on Daf Beis that we were going to talk about it on Daf Yod. So the last answer for Rabbeinu Nissim Gaon it's Tahidi Vamos Iri Acher Kiddushin, that when the Gemara Nivamos says that Tchilas Bia Ha'ara is you'd be Chayiv and Ha'ara, that's after Kiddushin. Da'idei Osa Ha'ara Havi Kinasua Kamo Chopa. That if she was already Mekadesh the woman, if he did Ha'ara, then that is Chuppah, and he has made her fully a Nesua. The La'achar Kiddushin. The Kasha the Perusha the Kicha Gabi Kiddushin Si V'lo Ma'ir B'Chuppah Klal. And Tosfos rejects what Rabbeinu Nissim Gaon says, because Ki yikach Ishisho Ba'ala, kicha of Kiddushin. Kicha is said by Kiddushin and not about chuppah at all. So even though Tosfos doesn't like this, this is an opinion of Rabbeinu Nissim Gaon, and it ends up that the shita of the Ravid is also like this, because the Ravid in Dav Zayin and Ksubas and the shita from Kubetzes, I heard this from my Rebbe, Rabbeinu Salvation Zichron L'Bracha, that when we say in the Berchos Erusin She'asur lenu es harusos, that we're not allowed to have bia with harusos, according to most opinions, that's only the atzasur midirabanan. But midiraisa you would be allowed to, except the Ravid says it's midiraisa. And Ravaran explained the Ravid shita with this, and with another detail which I can't remember right now. But fundamentally, Rabbeinu Nissim Gaon holds that she is not that an arusa is not allowed to. You're not allowed to have bia yet. So the pshat is it uses this logic of Rabbeinu Nissim Gaon that she's not fully married until chuppah. And also the Rambam shita, Rambam doesn't agree with this, but he agrees with it to a certain degree, because the Rambam says in Sefer Mitzvot, so there's a mitzvah l'kadosh day, a chuppah of a kiddushin, or kiddushin and ksuva, and it's a machlokes if ksuva is only midrabanan or to Rabbi Shema ben Gamliel it's diraisa, but ksuva wouldn't be needed unless you would be bowl her already. So to a certain extent, the Rambam agrees, not fully with the Ravid and not with the Rabbeinu Nissim Gaon, but an element of this obligation to the wife, which is formalized by the ksuva, which I get he counts it as the mitzvah of Kiddushin, even though Kiddushin is not a nisuin, but to a certain extent, the Rambam includes that chiyuv of nisuin together with the mitzvah of Kiddushin. So also, I think Ron explained in Yehuda they would make Berchos Erusin or the Sheva Brachos with the Erusin, even though and not with the nisuin. And they said, what were they miyachadem in Yehuda? So he explained, and there's a Mordechai somewhere, which is a unique shita. But he explained that because there's in Mesachas Kala, it says that Kalab lo bracha surah kanida. So they made the Sheva brachos at the time of Erusin so that this Isser wouldn't apply. Not that they would be fully married after the Erusin, but it would remove that element of Kalab lo bracha. Two dots in the middle of Yud Amud Aleph. Iboilahu, Bia nisuin osa or Erusin osa. Does Bia make nisuin or only Erusin? Nafkamina liyorshal atambo lahefron derel. So the machlokas is, would he be yarshin her if they were married and she died and they didn't have yorshim? He would get they didn't have children yet. He would get her property. And would if he was a Kohen and she died, does he have to be matame for her? If they're only mikudesh, it's not. If they were nisuin, yes. And could he be annul her vows? So if it makes nisuin, then he would inherit her if she didn't have brothers, and so she got inheritance from her father, and he would become tamei for her if she died and he was a Kohen. He would have a chiyuv because one of the close relatives of the Kohen has to be matame for the mace, umay for nidareha, and he could annul her vows. And if it only makes Erison, he wouldn't be matame for her if she died. He wouldn't be yorish her if she had property and her and they didn't have children yet, that the children would get it, so he would inherit her, and he can't be made for her, negate her vows. So what's the halacha? I'm Rabbi Tashma. Abai said we learned in the Brisa. The father merits for his daughter for Kiddushin, whether it's Kesef or Shtar Bia. And he also merits if she finds a lost object, so she motzi aveda, so the father has the aveda. And if she works, the father gets her salary. And if she makes an eder, the father has the right of negating, nullifying her nidar. And if she from Kiddushin was getting divorced, he could receive the get, and she's still a nara. And if a girl's mother died and let's say she died, so the daughter inherited her mother's property, the father is not allowed to get to use the stuff that the fields, let's say, are growing from the fact because they're not because they're owned by the daughter, not by himself. So he's not allowed to use the beneficial appreciation that the fields are developing, or like I mean, so if the fields are you planted them and they're growing something, he doesn't make the money off of those that produce while she's alive. Nises, but if she got married, yes, or love habal, so the husband has all of those benefits or rights, those chuyos, plus yeser she'ocha peres b'chaya. So if she had inherited a field, her husband is allowed to get benefit from the money that the fields are making. So Tani Bia, Tani Nises. So it mentioned Bia as one of these things, and it mentioned nisuin. So if Bia does nisuin, why does it mention both? So it must be that Bia is only Kiddushin. So the Gemara says, Kik Tani Nises Sashara. No, so we could say even if Bia makes nisuin, it mentioned nisuin in the case of where she was Mekudesh Saide Kesef or Aide Shtar. I'm a Rava. The Rava now tries to bring a proof. So Abai tried to bring a proof that it makes only Arison, and that was pushed off. Now Rava tries to bring a proof. Tashma, we learned in the Brisa. If a girl is 3 years old in one day, she could be Mikudeshes with Bia. And if she had to do Yibum, once he's 3 years old in one day, the Yavam has acquired her. And someone, if she's married, once she's 3 years old in one day, someone else who is Baal her has committed adultery and is Chayv Misa. And if she, let's say, was a Nida when she was 3 years old in one day, and if her husband was Baal her and she didn't go to the mikvah, he becomes Tame with her Tuma. And so Tachton Ke'alyon just means that if anything he sits on will become Tame. So even if you had 10 mattresses on top of each other, he only sat on the top one, but even all 10 of them, even the bottom one, would be Tame, even though he didn't actually sat on it, but that's what Tachton Ke'alyon. The bottom one is as if it was on top and he sat on it. So all of them, all those mattresses are lifted, he sat on them. If she was married to a Kohen, she's allowed to eat truma. And if one of the arayos in the Torah were Baal her, they get killed because they were Baal and Erva. And once she's 3 years old in one day, being Baal her is considered a bia. The heap tour, but she's exempt because she's a minor. Being Baal echad min psulim pasal min kahuna. And if someone was pasal, was Baal her, they give her a psul, and she's no longer allowed to marry a Kohen. If she was not married, someone who was an apostle came on her would disqualify her from marrying Kohen. So Katani be of a Tani Nisi. So again, in this case, it mentions if she was Nevala, and then it says if she had nisuin. Because the second clause on the top line here on Yudam Al Amid Beis, it says the Imnise Sekoin Achals Betruma, but it previously said if that she's Miskadesh is Bibia. So the imnises make so because the first clause said nivala, and then it says the imnises, so that shows that bia only makes Kiddushin, not nisuin. So hachikamer, no. So this is what the Brisa says: ihani nisuin to kohen in who, if she had nisuin were to a kohen, because the first few cases it could have been to anyone, a kohen, a Levi, Yisrael, but if the nisuin was to the kohen, then ochelas betruma. So we push it off, and we try to say no. You could explain that the bia makes nisuin, but the part of imnises isn't that bia only makes Kiddushin, but it's talking about imnises l'kohen. It was needed to know that if her husband was a kohen. Tashma. Let's try to bring another proof. Yochanan ben Bagbag Rabbi Yehuda ben Beser Nitzivin. Yochanan ben Bagbag sent a message to Rabbi Yehuda ben Beser Nitzivin. Shamati lecha shata amar rusa basishol chas b'truma. He says, I heard about you that you say that Bas Yisrael, who is Arusa to a Kohen, is allowed to eat Truma, even before Nisuin. Shalach lo, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beser responded back, V'yata Omer kain v'chsukani, and you don't say this? V'chsukani b'chshata baki b'chadrei Torah lidrash b'kal v'chomer. I've heard, I hold of you that you are an expert in the rooms of Torah, and you know how to make a kal v'chomer. Yeah, to Yodea, don't you know the following Kavachomer? Ma Shifcha Knana Shein Biasa Machilosa B'Truma, Kasma Machilosa B'Truma. A Shifcha Knana is that being boil her doesn't let her eat Truma, but money acquiring her, you can't acquire Shifcha Knana with Bia, but you could acquire her with money. So for Shifcha Knana, that being boil her doesn't make her a member of a Kohen's household to eat Truma. But if she was acquired by money, she is considered a Kinyan Kaspo, the financial acquisition of the coin, and she can eat truma. So a regular Bas Yisrael, who he was Mekadesh B'Bia, she would be allowed to eat the truma. So certainly, even if he was only Mekadesh with Kasef, she should be allowed to eat truma, even before nisuin, just from Eres. So that's Rabbi Yehuda ben Basira's Kavachomer. But what can I do? Because the Chachamim say in Arusa Bas Yisrael is not allowed to eat truma until she has chuppah. So it sounds like he holds of his Kavachomer on a Diraisa level, but he is motive that the Rabbanan restrict her from eating. We saw once earlier already that because she might give the truma to her brothers or sisters who are not Kohanim, and that would be a big problem. So Hechidami. So what's the case that he's talking about? If when he said if it's bia after chuppah or kesef with chuppah, but mechal achla, she could certainly eat truma because it was bia then chuppah and kesef then chuppah. So he must be his kavachomer must have worked that bia after chuppah and kesef is machilas b'truma, and kesef without chuppah is also lets her eat truma. How can you possibly say that though? The bia though had two elements. She had bia and you had chuppah. So that could be why she could eat truma if she was nivelas, because she had two stages happen, bia and chuppah. But hachachada, but just kesef, acquiring her with kesef is only one action. So maybe she's not allowed to eat truma yet. How can you compare? How can you make a kavachomer? They're not comparable. Elalav. So because of that, we can't explain it those ways. It must be that Rabbi Yehuda ben Basiris kavachomer is the bia shaloi de chopa, bekesef shaloi de chopa. That the kavachomer is from a straight up bia without chopa and straight up kesef Kiddushin without bia. That just like bia is machilosa b'truma, kesef is also machilosa b'chopa. So iyamar b'shlam nisuin osa. If bia makes nisuin, we understand why. Mishum hachip shita le the alima le bia mikasa. Then we understand why it was so pasha to him that bia is a stronger kinyan than kasa. But if Rabbi Yehuda ben Basira holds that that bia only does Kiddushin, how does he know? Again, he makes a kavachomer of kesef from bia, but how does he know that bia for Kiddushin allows her to eat truma? How did he know that? So therefore, we see from here that bia must make nisuin. So Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, so Rav bar Yitzchak can push up that braya. Really, his kavachomer from bia, that bia machilasa b'truma is bia with chuppah. The kesef shloi de chuppah, and the kavachomer the kesef is kesef without chuppah. And then when you ask how can you compare them, bia, which is machilasa b'truma with chuppah, is two elements of kinyan. Kesef is only one element. So how can you say a kavachomer on kesef from chuppah? From bia, if bia had bia and chuppah, which is two things. So no kavachomer. So Reb Nachman says kavachomer mia isa. You could still say the kavachomer. And this was the kavachomer. A shifcha kanan is that even if she had bia and chuppah, she still cannot eat truma. But if you kona her with kesef, she is allowed to eat truma. Zu shebiyaso machilasa b'truma idei chuppah eno dinsha kasma machilasa b'truma below chuppah. But this regular Bas Yisrael that bia allows her to eat truma because it's bia plus chuppah. So certainly kesef should be able to allow her to eat truma even without chuppah. That's a kavachomer. However, what can I do? Because Chachamim said a Rusa Bas Yisrael is not allowed to eat truma until she has chuppah. So from what Reb Nachman explains here, it seems that Bia doesn't make nisuin, because if Bia makes nisuin, why do you need Bia plus chuppah? Bia itself would count as chuppah. So mishum deula uben bag gabi shivcha knanis lo sher b'kinyana. Excuse me. Actually, mishum deula. Abbas Yisrael is not allowed to eat truma until she has chuppah because of Ula. That was on Daf Hey, where Ula said we're worried that she's going to give it to her brother or her sister, and they're not allowed to eat truma because they're not kohanim, and they're not married to a kohen, and they're not owned by a kohen. So she's not allowed to eat truma until she has chuppah. Uben Bagbag Abi Shivcha Knanas or Shar B'Kinyana, and Ben Bagbag would respond that Kavachomer doesn't make sense, because when you use kesef to acquire Shivcha Kananis, she is fully acquired. There's nothing left to do to acquire her. But Hacha Shar B'Kinyana. But if you marry a woman with Kiddushin, with kesef Kiddushin, you don't fully acquire her yet, because you still have to do chuppah. So it's no kavachomer there. Ravina Amar Midiraisa Mifshid Pshita Leita Achla. Ravina says that Ben Bagbag held that Midiraisa that she was allowed to eat truma. And he was asking, on a Rabbanan level, is she allowed to eat truma or not? And this was a question he sent Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. I heard that you hold that a Rusa Bas Yisrael could eat truma, and you're not worried to simpon. So simpon seems to be when you find, well, it's not seem to be. Rashi says that simpon is if you find a defect in her, a blemish, that would cause you to cancel the Kiddushin. So since they only had Kiddushin so far, maybe if he would know her 100%, he wouldn't want to be married to her. So because this kinyan is not guaranteed to go into the nisuin stage, we shouldn't allow her to eat truma, because maybe he's not going to. Rashi doesn't say this, but maybe he's not. Maybe he's not going to completely marry her. So shalach lei. So Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira sent back. Va'ata yata omer kain, and you don't say this. I hold of you that you're an expert in the rooms of Torah to darshan with kavachomer. Don't you know the following kavachomer? Don't you know that a shifcha kananis, that her being boel her doesn't make you acquire her? The kohen, and she's not allowed to eat truma when her master is a kohen. But if he buys her with money, she's allowed to eat truma. We're not worried that simpon, maybe he's going to find a defect or a blemish in her that will cause him to no longer own her. This one that her bia is allowed to make her eat, to allow her to eat truma, isn't the halacha. Certainly that her kesef would be allowed to eat her truma. We're not choshesh to finding a simpon, one of these big defects. But if he saw her, if he was boel her, he saw her without clothes, so there isn't going to be any more simpon that he could have. Now, just what's an extreme example? Let's say someone had a prosthetic leg. So if she's wearing a dress, you don't necessarily know. Maybe you think, okay, she has a little limp, or maybe not such a little limp. But if he was boel her, he would be able to tell that she's missing a leg. That's just an example of simpon. But what can I do? Says Rabbi But what can I say? The Chazal said that Bas Yisrael, who had Kiddushin from a Kohen, is not allowed to eat truma until she has chuppah, because of Ula's reason. We're worried that she's going to give it to her brother or sister, and they are not kohanim, and they're not allowed to eat truma. And if they eat truma, there's a misa b'dei shemayim, so it's a bad thing. So therefore, we don't allow her to eat truma until chuppah, and she lives in her husband's house.